Hi, everyone. It's Glennie at the Chilton Public Library here with Byron Hacker of the Master Gardeners here in Calumet County. And we are excited to start a 5-part series. So thank you all for coming. It's really good to see you all here today. And I think, Byron, let's get started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Usually I like to have fun doing this. So before we start, like when you go to church, you get, the scriptures read and everything. So I have this neat little saying that I usually, the very first class, about planting your spring garden for the garden of your daily living. Plant 3 rows of peas, peace of mind, peace of heart, peace of soul. 4 rows of squash, squash gossip, squash indifference, squash grumbling, and squash selfishness. Plant 4 rows of lettuce. Let us be faithful, let us be kind, let us be patient, and let us love one another. No garden is complete without tulips. Turnips. Turnip for meeting, turnip for service, and turnip to help one another. To conclude our garden, we must have time for each other, time for family, and time for friends. Water freely with patience and cultivate with love. There is much fruit in your garden because you reap what you sow. So, how true all of this is, especially in, what's all going on now.
Amen.
So,
Do we get a copy of that too?
well, I can make copies that, I don't have unless, Glennie, you wanna
I can
make some copies? You're certainly,
Thank you.
I've used this for many years, and I think to start a class, it's always so nice to have that, especially if you're talking about gardens. So, the big thing is we want to talk about, it's time to plan your garden, and the big thing is, what kind of garden do you want? What do you want to plant in your garden, and where do you want to plant it? And how big of a garden do you want? And that's the big question. So how many of you are experienced at gardening?
What do you consider experience?
Yeah, see, that's good. So my big question to you is, what do you want to learn from coming here? Or what do you want to hear about?
Well, I don't know. I've been gardening for 50 years. We've had a huge 7 children, and we have a huge garden every year. We still, even though we're retired, we still have a huge garden, but we give it away. We give a lot of it away. The food pantry, or for anyone that, sometimes we put it by the roadside, and it's amazing how things just disappear.
And people stop and pick it up.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, they're
yes.
not afraid to.
So you're an old pro. What can we teach you?
Well, you can always learn something. So
Okay.
and something I know there's like even what plants are good to be next to each other, or which are good neighbors sometimes, or even rotating plants that you don't plant in the same area all the time. So I can always learn. So
Sure.
I'm just here to I help her in her garden.
Oh, that's a cop out. So you're the young one, so she has taught you well. So that's great.
New to Wisconsin.
Oh, new to Wisconsin.
Got to learn how it's
That's
done
new.
here. Soil types. I've got starting from scratch. We moved from Colorado, and
Oh, okay.
I do space restraints. I grew all of my tomatoes in closed buckets. And I had like 10 or 12 and very successful at that. But I know I can do more than that and do better.
Sure.
But I came primarily to listen, get advice.
That's fine.
I'm newer to garden or vegetable gardening. This is the third year I'll have a vegetable garden, and I was interested in how you determine how to do the crop rotation. How do you determine, because everywhere you look it up, it's all different.
Different.
It's never the same. And then I had a huge problem with the squash vine borer last year. And I was interested in how to avoid that. I planted my garden early last year, and I read some about if you plant later, you maybe avoid it. I don't know, but just some interesting tips on that. I like to garden naturally without pesticides and herbicides, and I like to do it natural.
You weren't the only one last year that had problems with
Okay.
squash.
It was a big,
That was a big
Outbreak.
issue last
Okay.
year. And so, yeah. Back roll.
I want to be inspired to do my garden this year and use my space more efficiently. I have questions about composting. I have one of those barrel rotating composters that I kind of let freeze over the winter, so I'd like to see how I can keep my composting going year round.
Sure. Okay.
I'm more interested in starting plants and
Okay.
what the best way to do it is. Because last year we started them I got the machine shed in the shop. It's heated, but I didn't have it at 65 or 85 degrees. And so I'm kind of rebuilding my little temporary greenhouse, and I'm just debating, should I wrap it and put heat pads under the seeds? Or do I build a little thing and heat the whole little compartment?
The young man that helped me do this when we did this at the hospital a couple of years ago, he had a little mini greenhouse in his house, and he hooked it up to the heat system, had it over a heat register, had moisture in there to keep the water so the humidity stayed up. And it was all temperature controlled as well as the humidity. And there's so many different lights now. And when the last couple of years, I have little heat pads.
Right.
If you have a big operation, if you have a water bed, that's the place to put all your plants on to germinate the seeds on the water bed. I had a friend that had a greenhouse, and they purchased 2 water beds, and they didn't sleep in them, but that's how they started their seeds. And you find all these neat little tricks.
So you're talking a human's water bed, not a plant?
Yes, a
Okay.
regular human's water
Okay.
bed. Yeah, they had
But mine is only 4x4. It's not that big.
and well, that's
That's a small
fine.
bed.
But you can get heat pads.
Right.
And every seed is a little different. Like when we have our greenhouse, I would start our vegetables, and you know where I germinated them? On the heat ducts in the basement. And I learned the first year I did that, and I thought, well, it'll take 3 to 5 days. Well, I went down there. Here they were all up this tall within a matter of 3 days. They all sprouted because of the bottom heat
radiant.
was so great that they just germinated, and then there was no light, so they just kept growing and growing and growing. There are some new heat light or lights out now for plants, and they're multicolored, they're LEDs, and you can set which, light spectrum you want. If you have a bigger operation and you use shop lights, get one cool bulb and one warm bulb. So you're getting the full spectrum of light. And they used to have these fancy grow bulbs. And you can do the very same thing with buying from, some of the big box stores, just cool and warm bulbs versus the $15 bulb. That's one bulb, and you can get the cheaper ones for $1.59, $1.49. And if they last you 2 years, get rid of them. Very, very cheap way of,
Well, I'm very cheap because I took the lights out of my sister's house when she remodeled, so I got,
Sure.
I got there are actually two bulbs in each lamp.
Yeah.
And then I put them on chains so I can raise and lower them.
Sure.
And I just wanted to know if I put the heat pads underneath the plants, should I wrap it would that create enough heat in there?
Don't wrap it. Once you got the heat and they're up, get rid of the heat
Okay.
underneath, because then they're gonna, some
So
plants.
what temperature should I keep the shop at? Does it make any difference?
Well, yeah, it depends what you're planting.
Well, it's mostly
Cold crops.
peppers, tomatoes. Well, we started
Peppers,
with-
tomatoes like it warm. Cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower like it cold. Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, any of the cold crops,
Yeah, we don't
they-
plant any of that.
you don't plant any of that. But
Not yet, anyhow.
tomatoes, beans, tomatoes, peppers are very sensitive to cold temperatures. Once people get excited, they plant plants outside
Mhm.
too early. And if nighttime temperatures drop below 50 degrees, when peppers are blossoming, they will abort their produce, the fruit. So don't be so hasty. Sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot by planting too early. And people usually say, well, when do you plant? And I said, well, tomatoes and peppers, I never put them out until the end of May, and we still protected them. A lot of people are taking now the gallon plastic milk jugs and cutting the bottom out and using them as a little mini greenhouse. So if it gets cold at night, go screw the lid on. Okay, but then you got to get out there in the morning and take it back off again, because you're going to create too much of heat in there, and you don't want that. And you're going to have to be more careful with moisture, because that heat generates and uses up your moisture in the soil. So you got to be aware of that also. So kind of stay on top of that. A lot of times I tell people, if you want to do that, don't be afraid to buy one of these little temperature and moisture probes that you can put in your soil, and it'll tell you. The box stores have them, and it's not a bad investment to make. But tomatoes and they tend to be much more sensitive. Peppers are worse than tomatoes, but they like the temperature heat. But you got to be careful, like when you plant a tomato, you got to have the light, because they'll roll like this right up. And then what do you do if they're tall and leggy? So what do you do with that?
Plant them deeper.
Very good. Trench them, lay them on the side. And a trick that you can learn when you do tomatoes, when you need to if you're starting them from seed, it's good to transplant them a couple times. And when we had our greenhouse, you would just take them and you would pull them out, strip the roots off of them and plant them right down to the leaf. And, they will then develop roots all along the whole system of the stem. And they'll grow again. So you've stunted the growth of them a little bit. The trick with when you buy plants at the big box stores, most of them have been sprayed with growth retardant. Most people don't realize that. Petunias, geraniums, marigolds, they're all in nice, beautiful bloom. When they're unloaded off the truck and they haul them in, they've all been basically sprayed with growth retardant. That forces the blossom and it stimulates it to do that. And then it keeps the plant short. When, like I said, when we had our greenhouse, my marigolds never blossomed, or the petunias until, and I would always say, you want a healthy plant. And when they blossom, there's a lot of energy that's put into, that's taken out of that plant to form that bloom. But we have gotten so used, we want immediate beauty. Just like we've all, instant gratification, and that's kind of what our whole society has gotten to, instead of slowing down and, let it take time. I always would say, if you buy petunias or marigolds or things like that, and they're full of blossoms, when you plant them, pluck those blossoms off. That's the best thing to do, because what's it going to do? Energy goes back into that plant. It's just like all of us. If, as we get older, if we don't eat the proper foods and take our proper nutrition and our vitamins and, our blood pressure pills and everything like that, what happens to us? The whole system falls apart. And the same thing with a plant. When I worked for Calumet County, I was a social worker and I worked for the juvenile court. And everybody asked, well, why did you get into planting plants in greenhouses? Well, the answer I would give people is, when you deal with a kid, you can't pack them up and throw them away. A plant that doesn't look good, that you've planted or whatever, what do? You pull it out, throw it in the garbage. And you can't do that with a human being. And they said, oh, so you would have these kids that you dealt with, then you went home at night. And I said, well, yeah, you would see the changes in the plants just as well as you would in a human being if you deal with issues. So, plants are very much like us, that's some of the good things. Beans are also very, very sensitive to the cold. Very sensitive. They're as bad as peppers, if not worse.
Well, I say the peppers, tomatoes, then we usually start beans. You're talking like green beans and that?
Green beans, yes.
Yeah, then we just start in the garden.
In the garden, yeah. You don't need a. When I was involved with the community garden at the hospital, people went and purchased sweet corn in a container to plant it. And I said, come on, and I said, I can plant sweet corn right next to yours and mine will outdo yours. Just like squash, I don't recommend pre-planting squash or pumpkins, muskmelon, or any of that. When the ground is warm enough, hill it and, make a little mound and plant the seeds in there, and they're much more productive. People buy the pots, peat pots. And the biggest mistake people make though they plant the whole pot and everything in the ground. Well, if you don't keep it moist, what's gonna happen? The pot dries out and the roots will not penetrate. So then they say, well, my plant died. Well, tear that peat pot off or make cuts in the side, tear the bottom off. Well, the roots are coming out of the bottom. Those roots, if you tear them off and cut them off, they'll regrow. Your plant's not gonna die, so. Okay, other goodies.
Oh, I wanted to know about planting, like last year we let the dill come up in the garden
Yes,
because it had the years before.
sure.
So we let it in the carrot row. Well, then when it came, and the dill was really good in the carrot row, but then when it came to getting the carrots out, there were none. There were no carrots. So it's like, okay, you
They'll
can't,
kill the carrots.
yeah, it's because I thought, well,
It
that'd be
shouldn't
great.
have.
I mean, we had carrot tops that high.
Oh, you had no,
No carrots
nothing
underneath.
formed
I went
underneath.
to dinner, I got 6.
I don't know if it was a variety, that Nanas or
Well, we
whatever.
had
I
a
don't-
couple of different varieties.
Yeah.
Because the carrots, I don't really plant them in a row. I kind of plant an area.
Scatter them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then, but the dill come through and thought, well, we get lots of dill. And when I come to get the carrots, there were no carrots.
Huh,
And I never really dug any earlier to check.
sure.
I mean, the beets were the same thing. The dill was coming up in between, but we had nice beets,
You had nice beets.
but no carrots.
Huh.
So I don't know if it was just the wet weather.
Could be.
It was just unusual. I didn't have any carrots. I've always had carrots grow.
Some years are so strange with growing plants. Things thrive, you've been doing this for
For the last 2 years have been weird.
And
So carrots weren't good for us last year, not real good compared to the year before, they were beautiful. But last year they weren't the greatest carrots to begin with, so maybe.
I was just surprised you had all the tops, so I just
you have
we
the
didn't
tops, but no
nothing
carrot.
underneath. Like, oh,
Could be, I don't know. How much fertilizer did you dump on?
I really don't put much fertilizer. Let's see, what did we do last year? I don't even know if I did anything. I used to take the manure out of the maternity pen,
Sure.
put that on the garden and
Yep.
I'd turn it under.
That's
Yep.
not,
But
that's
I
not
haven't,
viable anymore.
but I didn't do that for 2-3 years now.
Well, going back, my mother, was an avid gardener, and I learned a lot of tricks from her. And the cardinal rule of thumb was to put that manure on in fall
Right.
and not work it in, let it on until the next spring, and then you work it in. Why do you do that?
So that it ages and the acidity comes out of it.
Yes. Another big problem, I just had a call the other day. Well, I dumped all my wood ashes in my garden, and I said, I learned the hard way 1 year or two. I dumped all our wood ashes in, and the pH was so out of whack that nothing grew. It was all kind of fried, burnt. And I always tell people, well, if you're going to do something like that, just lightly spread it. A lot of people are getting the digested manure from mega farms. And it's a very good source, but it's also certain weed seeds are not killed. We're fighting purslane at the city flower bed here. And it's something we've fought for umpteen years already, and we can't get rid of it. I talked to the weed experts in Madison, and they said, well, purslane seeds can be viable in the soil if you work them up for 3 to 15 years, that they'll live and survive. So this year, we're gonna try something completely different up at, when we do the city flower bed, we're gonna put wood chips on the entire bed. And then no-till plant. So we're gonna try that because a lot of farmers, somebody said, well, you gotta till your garden. And I said, well, the farmers do no-till and they don't have a problem. And so we're gonna try that just to see how that works. Because then the purslane is not going to germinate because it won't have the sun to hit the seeds to germinate. So I don't know. So if we have a big flop this year and you see not good things up at the Chilton City flower bed.
Well, I read once they said when we were mow and plowing in the fields, in the farms,
Yes,
they said that if a seed gets one blink of light as you roll it over, that was enough to set it off for the
Yes.
next year.
yes.
So they said it was better to plow at night
Yeah.
No rest.
because it wouldn't get shot of light. I don't know if it made
jeez.
too much difference, but it was an interesting article.
How many of you water your garden? When do you water? What time of day?
Either early morning or late in the afternoon.
Yeah, never water late afternoon or evening. Why? Any
Shop the plant.
Moisture, no,
powdery mildew?
mildew.
Okay.
That's what it, we had a greenhouse operation here in the county. And they called and they said all their tomatoes in the greenhouse, this was a commercial where they harvested the plants. Well, the plants were loaded with powdery mildew. And I said, when are you watering? Oh, we spray at night because then it conserves the moisture. I said, that's your problem. You're getting all the moisture on the leaves so it doesn't dry. And then when the mildew spores breed and multiply in the hot, dry, or moist atmosphere. So that's what was going on. So yeah, be careful. And I always say, I'm a lazy gardener. When Judy and I had mainly our first garden boys, it was across Highway 57 from our house to the other side of the road. So we never watered. We took water when we planted tomatoes. And that was the only thing that ever got watered when we started the seed. We would dig a deep hole and fill the hole with water, put the plant in and cover it up. That's the last water the thing ever got. And we had very good luck. One year, I can tell you with watering, one year we had petunias planted in the city flower bed. Well, the one lady that was in charge, one of our master gardeners, she went and turned the sprinklers on all the time and watered the garden. Well, she did it without fail every week. And what happened, the petunias got very dependent that they didn't need to have a big root system. Well, she and her husband went on vacation for 2 weeks and nobody maintained that consistent watering. Well, the petunias all said, oh, it's time to die and go to seed. Well, they all dried up and that was the end of it. So, another little trick of the trade, with, doing plants like that. So,
So watering once a week is not a good idea.
well, if it's real dry, but don't get your plants accustomed and then quit watering. That's the biggest mistake we make as gardeners. We water and they look good, then we stop.
Well, it's supposed to rain in between.
Well, yeah, but you all know, you came from Colorado, you'll learn real quick. Wisconsin can be real funny. he could have a mile down the road from my house, he could have an inch of rain, and I'm lucky I get 2 drops.
Uh-huh.
You know, I always, years ago, when my wife's uncle was the highway commissioner, in wintertime with snowstorms, he always said, County E is the cutoff. And Hilbert would have either no snow and we had it all, or they got lots and we got nothing. Same thing with Kiel, where the overpass is going into Kiel, that always was a big cutoff also. And you know, it's really funny, but yes, you never know in Wisconsin, you
I
might
still
get,
think some of that's Lake Winnebago.
is what?
Lake Winnebago.
Oh, of course it is.
But-
We're caught between what? The 2 big lakes.
No, but I mean, when the storms come, they come over to the cliffs and they'll go north, they'll go
Yes,
south.
well, look
Where
at
they go.
most of the tornadoes, they come over the lake, who gets hit? Sherwood?
Chilton.
Yeah, well,
Fond du
not
Lac.
a lot, we've, and the jump, well, how many years ago was that in May where we got hit on a
2000.
Friday? I was up in Appleton and that's when we had the flower shop and my wife called and said, how come you're still working? And I said, why? And she said, well, you better come home. The snowplows are out plowing the hail. And, St. Nazians, look how they got destroyed with trees. Our master gardening group went over there and planted trees for 2 weekends to replenish the trees, over there. Yeah, exactly. That lake has a big effect on our weather here. Why do we have a lot of good vineyards along Highway 55 on the bluff, That's why they thrive. Look at our main apple orchards, all along the lake. That makes a big, huge difference. So, other things to consider is the big thing when you're planting your garden, you have to decide what do you want to grow? What kind of vegetables do you want to grow? And then to, really decide, do you want that? There's a lady that she just came out with a new book on the 15th. I got it on the 16th. And it's on succession planting. And it is a whole new phenomena of, planting things 2 weeks apart from each other, starting some things and 2-3 weeks later, planting something again. Kohlrabi, perfect example. We buy plants for the first planting, plant them, plant seeds then. And then when they come up and they're too thick, well, you thin some of them and then you start another row. Succession planting, same thing with green beans, of plant 2-3 weeks after the first planting and do another crop. Same thing with broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. If you get into making coleslaw in the fall of the year, you need the old, big, huge flat Dutch, or you can go up north of the valley and buy all your cabbage for little or nothing and not have to worry. Like Lenny is shaking her head.
They're really big.
Yeah, they're big. I have a niece that comes from West Bend and they drive up there every year and get a whole back of a truckload full. And then she calls and, well, we're going over by her mother's place in Kiel and we have to make sauerkraut. Yeah.
That's a hint
so-
for you to come and visit.
yeah, they always do. They're gonna come and, you gotta run the old cutter. So yeah, so the big thing is, decide. Then what kind of soil? Our soil around here, as you probably found out, we have a lot of clay. the big problem with, and anybody that's a farmer, you know, you don't till clay gardens because what are you gonna end up with? Marbles. I made that
Wet.
mistake tilling one year when it was too wet,
Too wet.
and you get big old marbles, and we just, you know, I still hear about that now, and that was umpteen years ago. Yeah, and yeah, make sure you don't till that early and let it completely dry, not just the surface, but dig down and make sure if you're gonna till, you know, if you're gonna dig a hole and put your plants in, it's fine because the moisture's there.
Yeah.
It's not gonna hurt. So, you know,
Yeah, I just started a hold a barbecue stand in,
sure,
and I'm down this far, and it's mud
mud,
down at the very bottom still.
yeah,
And, but I'll be starting out with, there's never been a garden in our place. It's all sod.
oh,
And so I've got that to think about doing. Have somebody cut the sod out and start, you know, in baby steps along the way.
yeah. The big thing, if you don't wanna cut the sod out, take black plastic
Right.
and put it on newspapers, carpeting, tear the carpet out of your house and go put it in your garden, and it'll kill your plants.
We have wood floors, so that,
Oh,
Oh,
Luckily, planks out there too, but
yeah, yeah,
but get rid of the sod that way.
sure,
cover it,
sure.
smother it.
Right?
Yep.
And that'll take. a
It'll
year,
take a year,
Yeah, or so.
and you know, if you could round up it, if you wanna use Roundup. But if you did, I would suggest still covering it.
Right.
And let it sit for a year, then start working in, you know, compost material and, grass clippings, any of that. A lot of people say, well, I'll just go up to the city when people mow their lawn and get the grass clippings. Be careful of that. You know why? Because a lot of them are sprayed with chemicals. And you're bringing that chemical, putting it on your garden, and it'll kill your plants. Be careful of that. Yes,
Last year I was trying this Native American thing with the three sisters, corn, beans,
Yep.
and squash in a hill.
Yep.
Have people had experience with that? I found out that can't plant them all at the same
same
time.
time. I just listened to a training program from Lakota Indian up in northwestern Wisconsin, and they talked about the three sisters. And the Lakota College up there specializes and does all kinds of experiments with that. And at the Spooner Research Station, it is where they do a lot of their plantings and, you know, whatever. So, yeah, you got to kind of scatter the starting times. And you got to kind of be careful, you know, because the corn will overdo the squash a lot of times. And with sunlight and, you know, whatever. So,
What happened to your plot?
Well, actually, the squash dominated everything.
everything,
Yeah. Yeah, the corn didn't do well at all. I got a few beans, but
take the corn out of it and plant squash and beans and, you know, find something else. Or kind of, you know, experiment with doing the corn. I'll have to look back at my notes from taking that class as to what they planted with the three sisters.
I have a feeling I need to start the corn early.
Early,
Yeah,
and what kind of corn was it?
Sweet corn.
Sweet corn, okay, okay. I think she talked about corn and I think they didn't use sweet corn. They used the Indian quote
Right,
unquote corn
yeah,
and that did well.
yeah, that's more traditional.
Sweet corn can be kind of persnickety at
Okay.
times. I found that, when my son had planted, big field of sweet corn, one year it was great. And the next year we used, 4 different varieties. 2 of them were horrible. And the other 2, they were very productive. My sister and brother-in-law, they plant all kinds of sweet corn. And sometimes it does well and then other times it doesn't.
Last year, our sweet corn came up, got about that time, and pretty soon they were gone.
And it was gone.
They just disappeared.
Okay.
Were there bugs out there, or if it was just a dry, it was dry and
Dry.
spring, so it just struggled. But we had converted the old cow yard pasture, that was grass.
Sure.
That's what we chewed up, and that's what we're gardening on right now. So when you said about fertilizing, I think we're good with fertilizer for a few years.
Well, but that's when we had our garden across the road, it was in an alfalfa field.
Right.
That's what we started with.
See, the first year was when Sharon decided we should do a garden in the cow yard. I was like, okay, well, that was in spring, so we didn't, like I said, didn't get rid of all the grass stuff. So
Sure.
we just basically ripped it up and planted, and it was just like a bog when it rained.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
yeah.
just like grass and mush.
Sure.
So last year, now I actually tilled it, plowed it, and then went through the ripper again and kind of got, I think we had a little bit of a hard pan in there and just got some of that
Clay.
ground
Yeah.
and sod all worked in it, so. Cause we're planting about an acre and a half of stuff. So we got,
We have 2 gardens. One we plant mostly are
one's behind,
potatoes and the carrots and the beets. And the other one is the corn and tomatoes and the peppers. The big
cucumbers.
cucumbers. Oh, yeah, we had cucumbers. So
See,
you know
and-
that.
I can't grow cucumbers.
Mhm.
Never have been able to. And, other people can grow cucumbers
Oh my
and they have
God.
bushels of them. We've never
We
been
have
able
66 hills last year.
to
And they
grow.
were,
That's what we were
they
doing.
were 6 feet apart and they were joining each other. I mean,
Yeah.
They were,
Wow.
they
Oh,
were
at the end of
big.
the season, they just kept going and just cut the ends off so they quit growing.
How many of you do raised beds?
I love raised beds because it's defined.
Yeah,
It stops me. If I think I want to do something else, it's like, oh, the beds are full.
Yeah.
I'll have to wait till that's done and then maybe I'll slip it. So that's where I like this is succession planting,
Plenty,
where I think of it in terms of instead of getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger,
yes.
I used to have that problem in the spring. It's now like, oh, we're full, but oh, if you're really wanting this, then okay, let's do it after that. And
Well, also, a lot of people waste their space by doing a row and then a little path. You said take and scatter the seeds all over. A friend of mine had 2 raised beds at his house, and I said, Leonard, just take the seeds and let's just scatter them and leave them growing. He said, that was the neatest thing because you could get at it from both sides with a raised bed and, easily get in there to pick.
mhm.
So, yeah, it's same thing with containers. Last year, I kind of did an experiment with onions. And I had an big old barrel that we used to have in front of our store. And I planted red onions in there because it was just sitting there. And I thought, well, I'm going to try it. I had some red onion plants and I thought I'm going to plant them. And I'd never grown onions like that before. My mother was the master at growing big onions. She didn't teach me something.
Did you
because-
water them regularly?
Yes, they were watered regularly.
And you didn't forget?
Big problem with container gardens,
Yeah.
you have to water. Tomatoes especially, if you have them in buckets,
Every day.
you have to water them every day. Yes, tomatoes love to drink moisture. So, yes, that's. So what else should we?
Can you talk about bugs? I'm interested about potato bugs. We don't do anything to put anything on, we pick potato bugs.
Sure.
Some years potato bugs are bad. Do potato bugs go in the soil or are they on the potatoes that you buy? Because they're.
They overwinter in a fence line. Wherever you have
You
potatoes.
try to rotate, but still, some years there's nothing, and then the next year, there's an abundance of them.
Yes,
And you have
Yes.
to be so careful
Well,
to get those eggs.
it all depends what our winters are like. How many real cold, below zero extended period time did we have in the last several years? Very little. I had one gardener, they had some, I can't remember how old their boys were, but they paid them a penny for every bug, potato beetle that they picked. And they would come with jars full of them because they had a huge potato crop. And sometimes that's the best, because if you don't get rid of them and they head off to overwintering on a fence line, they love to overwinter on a fence line near your garden. That's what happens with potato beetles.
Well,
You
the
either
other,
gotta pick them and spray them, or
We never spray them, we just pick them.
gotta pick
And check underneath the leaves for the yellow, the orange
Yellow.
eggs.
yes, yep, and if you see the egg mass, take your
Just-
finger and,
And
yep,
smash.
or tear the leaf
Tear
off.
the leaf off.
Yep,
Smash it.
exactly.
I just, my husband just said, I think they're on the potatoes, and I said, I don't think so, because I think I thought they were in the ground. But, you move them and then still, it's like
Yep.
some years and some years it wasn't, so.
Yep.
Last
okay.
year was bad.
but do you think it'd be a difference with the fact we had no snow?
No.
I mean, that freezes the ground where we,
Yeah.
if you've got a good snow cover, they can overwinter a lot easier. If you don't
Yep.
have the snow cover and you have
That's
the
right.
cold, that will help take them out too. Because, you get this much snow that down there never really freezes, but if there's no snow like this here, then the frost gets into the ground and we'll wipe out some of these.
One year we had we had 4 rows of potatoes, and we had one plant that was just full of them, and the rest were fine.
And
My brother
That was
actually had
weird.
it a couple years ago. He didn't go to garden for 3 days. He went out and looked and the leaves were all gone.
all gone.
Oh, they ate so fast.
Ate them so fast.
Yep.
He was so mad. He didn't go down and look at the garden for 3 days.
It's just like the armyworms. Once they come out and they go up the tree and they start eating, it doesn't take long, and they'll devour like crazy. Doesn't take long. Not at all. So
Is there anything to do about squash vine borer?
that is very similar to potato beetles. Same thing. It gets in, and once they're in there, and the big thing is, if you start seeing the plant declining, get rid of it. Pull it out and take it someplace and either burn it or send it to the garbage dump and get rid of it, because they'll lay eggs and and then other years, people have no problem with them. And it just all depends again on our crazy weather here in Wisconsin. And I don't have a magical answer of what you can put on that's non-chemical, that would be organic, that you could use to control them. In some years, you don't have a problem with it.
Were those yellow and black striped beetles,
Yes,
to be clear? I know them well.
so other goodies. Anything about your soil?
I was just gonna give a little tip on, like, we plant a lot of cabbage. We do plant cabbage.
Sure.
And, cabbage is something too that when you get the little bugs or the little worms or whatever in there, if you put cornmeal, spread cornmeal over them, and that will take care of those bugs. I really learned that maybe like 5 years ago, and before that, I never knew that.
Do that.
So you just sprinkle
Sprinkle cornmeal on the plant where they were, looks like the bugs or those worms
Sure.
are,
Mhm.
and they'll eat those worms and die from that.
That
Oh.
from that, yeah, plugs them up.
Yeah.
Just like years ago, I shouldn't even say this, but I will. Juicy fruit gum. We're all old enough that we remember the real juicy fruit gum, Wrigley's juicy fruit gum. You could put that out for moles and voles, and they would eat it, and it would plug the digestive system up, and they would die. Well, they've taken something, out of that juicy fruit gum, it don't work anymore. And we always laughed when the professor from Madison, I can't remember his name now, but he would laugh and he said, well, I can't officially say that, but he said, I know exactly what you're talking about because it does work. And some of, these old wife tales of, things like that, but I've never heard the cornmeal. And just like people get broccoli, cauliflower, and those little green worms are in it. Well, what do? You put it in the salt water, and if you blanch it, what's going to happen? The worms will come floating up to the top. Well, you don't, if you ate one cabbage worm, whoopee, it's not going to kill you.
Okay.
I just never tell anyone. I never tell anybody how many I see.
Yeah. I always have to laugh when I judge at fairs, and kids come in with the broccoli, and that's the first thing I look for. And some of them that I've judged a couple of years, they know what I'm up to, and they said, we went through and we soaked it in salt before we bought it a lot. So yeah, little tricks like that. The old gardeners, you learn real quickly, what to do and whatever. But new gardeners get all panicky when they see, cabbage, they can just mutilate your plant. The broccoli, they don't eat they eat the leaves per se. And not necessarily, they're not going to eat the broccoli. They'll lay their eggs and the worms develop and so on. So so you got your magical answer for you told us something. So what else for this week? Next 2 weeks from now, we're getting seeds ordered. We'll talk about what to look for and early starting tips. If I don't know how many of you start seeds and what kind of soil to use, I'll bring some of the actual things that I suggest planting in and starting seeds in. I'll bring that propagation map, the heat map that I have, the new lights that you can switch and show the different color spectrums. And they're only about this big. They're expensive. They're about $40 a set, but they got 4 LED bulbs in them and they're great. I'll bring that all, for the next time. I didn't, bring any of that tonight thinking we're just talking about planting your garden for now. So the big thing is when you do, kind of mentally decide what do you want to plant and how much do you want. And little recommendations, seeds have gotten very expensive. So if you haven't ordered yet and you want certain varieties, do it quickly because you might not get it. And be prepared. The costs are going to be about double or triple from what you paid a year ago.
So I know we do buy some seeds at Sherwood Elevator.
Yes, yes.
And there you just say how much, like, do you want a quarter of a cup or something? They don't have all the seeds you need, like I always look for kale and
Sure.
there's a lot of things they don't have, but they are so inexpensive,
Yes.
but they don't have everything.
The co-op,
In town here too?
no.
Oh,
Country Vision?
Velders.
oh,
There's, it's not Country Visions, but it's Beyond Velders, and I can't remember the name of it, but very similar to the Sherwood Elevator.
okay.
You can go and they have little things that you can pull and how many seeds or whatever you want. Yes.
Yeah.
Highly recommend
Yeah.
doing that because those are very good quality seeds.
Yeah, that's what they say, so.
Yeah, they are. And highly recommend doing that. Otherwise, like I said, the box store seeds, I'm not a big pusher of those kind of seeds. If you're going to use them, buy an extra seed packet because your germination might not be near as high as if you get from a very good seed company. So did you know how to test for your germination rate?
I'm doing some right now. I've saved the pepper seeds out of my peppers.
Oh, okay.
Is that doable? I mean,
Oh, yeah, but it
I'm
depends
germ testing them right now.
it depends what kind of pepper you had. Because if it's a hybrid, you might not get what you had last year.
That's what my son said.
Guaranteed.
Because I said I had the reds, the greens, and the yellows. He says, "Are you going to get reds?" He said, "Well, if they're hybrids, no."
No, you won't, and they might not even, you might have hot pepper. Yes, because hybrids are bred off of different plants, just like petunias. There's a certain color, and you might save the seed. You might not even have a petunia. You might have a nicotiana, which is flowering tobacco that blossoms, but it's in the petunia family. And, be careful. If they're open pollinated seeds, non-hybrid, is very good with collecting and saving seeds.
Because we've done that even with our muskmelon.
Yeah.
People buy a melon in the store and you eat the melon, you take the seeds, throw them in the garden and
Gosh,
start your plants. And
yeah.
go out there after a while, you thin them out till there's 3 left. And
Yes, pumpkins are notorious for that.
I grew pumpkins on the manure pit one year
Yeah,
without knowing it.
without knowing it.
Threw the pumpkins out there.
Sure.
And all once they were out there, and I was starting to pit all these pumpkins are floating around. So I started scooping them out and I put them around the house. And Sharon goes,
Nice.
"Where did this pumpkin come from?" I mean, they were big. They were
Out of the pit.
Wash them off a little.
A lot of good nutrients they have. So, Glennie, how long are we supposed to go?
I think we're about an hour is about now, so thank you,
Well,
Byron. I really
yeah,
appreciate it.
that's fine. Does anybody have any other questions?
Well, I guess going back to my original question, if I put the heat pads down for starting the seeds, should I build something over the top of this
Well,
for a
okay.
little greenhouse, or if I'm having on the heat pads?
Okay, say this is your planting and you got your heat source here, okay? They have those plastic domes, but if you don't want to invest in them, get a sheet of clear plastic. Go and steal some of Sharon's, the press and seal plastic stuff that you
Okay.
would put over, food. Or I used to just go and buy a roll of clear plastic and then cut to the area that I wanted to put it over.
So you laying that right on top of
Yeah.
your potting, your pot?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
See, I was just gonna kind of cover everything right over the top of my lights to keep the whole,
sure.
Area one.
Well, yeah, a little mini greenhouse, you
Right.
can do that also. But if you got a heat source and you put that plastic over your flat,
okay,
you will have a much better germination rate than if you leave it open completely. And once they come up, take the plastic off. And then use your heated structure for that.
well, I guess my question was, if the heat pads generate enough heat, or I put some other source of heat
Well,
in there,
but I suggest taking
taking off
the
that heat?
heat off once your plants are up. Because you're gonna have to make sure your soil stays completely moist or they're gonna dry up on you.
Mhm.
That's gonna be the problem.
So
Because
just leave
when
the pads hanging in the greenhouse for the heat source.
Yes, sure, you could. I don't know if it'll make enough heat that way though. Get a little portable
Well,
heater.
that was the question, whether, how should I keep it warm
Get a little
instead of
portable
heating the whole
heater.
shop?
Yeah.
Okay.
Get a little portable heater.
Okay, well, I've got them laying around, just,
And then it's going to provide air movement, which is very good for young seedlings.
Yep.
Same thing, keep your lights down close. And then as the plants grow, move it up little by little by little. Because otherwise, if you have it up here and your plants are down here, they'll grow as tall as the light. Which you don't want.
but you said you're gonna talk about that next week, so we'll ask.
Yeah, well, I'll bring them next week. Yeah, I'll bring.
So
the
who
different-
is everyone that's here? My name is Sharon Fox and we live around St. John.